the most dominant personality in the Messianic camp in Israeli history. The founding father, you could say, of the Israeli Messianist camp is Meir KAHANE, an American-born rabbi, came up here in New York, and it's not difficult to understand what his ideology is. You can just read his magnum opus, The Jewish Idea. It's a bit long, so you might want to just go for one of the other books he wrote, They Must Go. There's not really mincing his words here. He's just saying straight up, they must go, straight up ethnic cleansing. But beyond that, here's just a couple of choice quotes so you can get a sense of the ideology that that his followers imbibed from him. When I'm prime minister, no Arab will be hurt by Jewish terrorism because there won't be an Arab left in Israel. Here's another ditty. I want to remove the Arabs from Israel because I do not want to kill them every week. Or how about this one? They will come to me, bow to me, lick my feet, and I will be merciful and will allow them to leave. Whoever does not leave will be slaughtered. So this is Kahanism, okay? There's no bones about it. This is where we're at. Now, admittedly, when Kahane, and of course, he now has legions of followers. People took to his vision. Now, the thing about Kahane and Kahanism is it's most dangerous dafka when there's a chance for peace. Exactly when maybe Israel will steer off the path of permanent apartheid, that's when they're most dangerous. When there's a thought that maybe they won't continue, it's the right word, lurch to the right, that's when they pull out the big guns. And we see this consistently time and time again in the late 70s, 1980s, when Egypt and Israel buried the hatchet, made a peace deal between Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. That's when the Kahanists implemented their plan, and they plotted to blow up the Dome of the Rock, the Haram al-Sharif in the old city of Jerusalem, the most beautiful building in Palestine, one of the most important Muslim shrines in the country and in the world. So Kahane sat in jail for 6 months for plotting to blow it up, and the hope was that by destroying it, this would cause a religious war between Jews and 1 billion Muslims all over the world, and there would be no more chance for peace, and that would be it, back to permanent war. And this is like a pattern that they repeated again and again. Now, if you can imagine, after this, after he plotted and sat in jail for wanting to blow up the Dome of the Rock, he was then elected to the Knesset. Now, when he was elected to the Knesset, we found something interesting. At that point, Israeli society was still not comfortable with Kahane, in the main. And so when he would come up and speak in front of the assembly, members of the ruling party would walk out. Even the right-wing Likud party, its members would walk out of the Knesset plenum because they just couldn't countenance his open, unabashed racism. It was just too much for them. That's where Israeli society was in the 1980s. And eventually, he was turfed out of the Knesset. The Knesset passed a law that said a party that espouses racism as part of its ideology cannot stand for election. And so he was no longer able to run for the Knesset. But of course, as I said, he had legions of followers. Soon afterwards, one of those followers from his party, Baruch Goldstein, as you may know, again, with the same idea of trying to prevent any possibility of peace, when in the early 1990s you had the Oslo peace process, for good and bad. We can talk about that later, but at least it was an attempt to try to end decades of war and ethnic cleansing between, and fierce hatred between Israelis and Palestinians. So when this happened, when there was a possibility of peace, that's when Baruch Goldstein and the Kahanes stepped up, and Goldstein went into, again, one of the most important places for Jews and for Muslims, the holy shrine in Khalil, in Hebron, and at this, the Cave of the Patriarchs, he came in and he massacred the biggest mass murder in Israeli history. He murdered 29 Palestinians and injured over 100, wounded over 100. Now, Goldstein was just one Kahanist killer. There's been dozens of Kahanist killers, over 20 at least. He had the biggest death count, but many have that record. But what was most powerful about Goldstein's massacre, not only did he have the highest death toll, but he succeeded in killing Oslo, because 40 days after this horrific massacre, exactly 40 days, which is the Muslim mourning period, the Arba'in, exactly 40 days later, that's when Hamas began for the first time its suicide bombing campaign in 48 Israel, exactly 40 days later. And that, of course, for Israelis, that was the end of it. They wouldn't imagine the possibility of peace after these suicide bombs. So he succeeded. The Kahanists succeeded in doing what they wanted to. Now, Kahane himself was killed in New York in 1990. After he passed, the reins were passed over to his son, Binyamin KAHANE. Now, I'm going to now explain to you what happened to the rest of Kahane's followers. Did they die in obscurity? Did they scuttle into the corner? No, just the opposite. They went on to take over the reins of power. And this is what I mean by that. So, first of all, as I said, Kahane died. His son Binyamin took over. Now, Binyamin wasn't really as, let's just say, he wasn't really a man's man. He wasn't able to stir up the emotions of people. He wasn't the incredible figure his father was. So behind the scenes, the person who was really running the show was another longtime Kahanist who had also moved from New York, Mike Guzovsky. All right, so after Baruch Goldstein's massacre in Hebron, Guzovsky said of Baruch Goldstein, he was the sweetest Jew who ever lived. So you can get a sense of who this guy is. Now, in the wake of this, all right, we have, again, the Kahanists are doing everything they can to try to end the Oslo Accords, to try to blow it up. Guzovsky was the spearhead of an effort by Kahanists to essentially start a settler army, a militia of their own that could wage war on the Palestinians. If the Israeli army wasn't going to do it, then the Kahanists were going to do it. And they made plans to import arms and even tanks, if you can imagine this. Of course, the Shin Bet realized what was happening and they prevented him. But this was their plan, that they were going to wage full-on war with armaments. Guzovsky was not able to bring in the cache of weapons that he wanted to. And so what he did next was he decided to train dogs, to breed dogs that would, because he wasn't able to bring weapons into the country, but he could bring vicious dogs in. So they acquired dogs, and now he breeds dogs. And if you'd believe it, these dogs patrol areas around the settlements in order to expand the land that settlers sit on, in order to make Palestinians fear just being able to walk outside their village and to graze with their sheep and to farm their fields. So this is Guzovsky. And in recent years, we have the state of Israel officially adopting Guzovsky and folding his patrols, his canine patrols, into the Israeli army. So you have joint patrols with the Israeli army. So now the Kahanist has been totally normalized with Israeli security forces. Guzovsky went on to be a town councilor in the Kahanist stronghold of Tapuach. And as you can see, the Israeli media treats him like a darling, like he's some kind of hero for his canine patrols. So this is how the Kahanists are whitewashed in the media.